In Moscow, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov addressed the deteriorating situation in Gaza and the broader Palestinian territories, calling attention to the unfolding humanitarian crisis. Speaking alongside Jordanian officials, Lavrov outlined Russia's position on the escalating conflict, humanitarian relief, and the urgency of renewed negotiations. He began by acknowledging that international and regional issues had dominated the agenda during his discussions with Jordanian counterparts. The Palestinian question, he said, was at the forefront. Lavrov explained that both Russia and Jordan shared deep concern over what he described as a rapidly worsening crisis in the Palestinian territories, particularly in Gaza and the West Bank. Lavrov did not shy away from painting a stark picture of the reality. He said, a real humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding. Russia strongly condemned the terrorist attacks against Israel, which were organized on October 7, 2023. He emphasized that Russia's condemnation of the attacks remained firm, underscoring that accountability must be sought. At the same time, Lavrov made it clear that Moscow rejected indiscriminate reprisals. He declared, but of course, we proceed from the fact that those guilty of organizing and carrying out these terrorist acts must bear the most severe punishment. Yet in his next statement, he outlined a line Russia was unwilling to see crossed. Lavrov stressed, however, we cannot accept collective punishment of all Palestinians in response to the terrorist attack that took place on October 7, 2023. This condemnation of collective measures was followed by an urgent reminder of the toll on ordinary Palestinians. Lavrov warned that punitive restrictions were not only worsening daily living conditions, but also obstructing essential humanitarian aid. He noted, as a result of this collective punishment, residents of Gaza and now also the West Bank face extremely difficult conditions for the delivery of humanitarian aid to Palestinian areas where people urgently need food, medicine, and other basic necessities. The Russian foreign minister underscored that independent reports already showed devastating consequences. Drawing on United Nations data, he added, and there are already data from UN employees working in the region that dozens and dozens of Palestinians, including many children, are dying of hunger. His remarks sought to highlight that the situation had moved beyond political disagreement to a full-blown humanitarian disaster. He stressed that Russia, together with Jordan, viewed humanitarian relief as an immediate necessity rather than a secondary issue. He stated, in this regard, of course, we are interested, and we spoke in detail about this today, in restoring the functioning of humanitarian mechanisms of the UN system in the region, removing all obstacles in the way of their full activity. Lavrov also touched on the immense challenges of aid delivery under current conditions. With borders tightly restricted and logistical difficulties mounting, the task of getting food and medicine to those in need has grown nearly impossible. He admitted, we ourselves feel how difficult it is to resolve logistical issues now, and therefore we see eliminating humanitarian problems, overcoming humanitarian disasters as the most urgent priority step. The Russian minister framed these steps not as optional, but as the essential groundwork for any further progress. Without immediate relief, he implied, the crisis would only deepen. Yet Lavrov also stressed that humanitarian efforts alone would not be sufficient. Beyond the urgent relief measures, he pressed for renewed political engagement. He said, and the next steps must, of course, include measures to de-escalate the overall situation. We advocate the resumption of negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, both to resolve current issues and to achieve a ceasefire. By advocating talks, Russia positioned itself as a counterweight to what Lavrov characterized as Western inaction or obstruction. He suggested that the long-standing peace process had been undermined, often deliberately, over the decades. While he did not elaborate extensively in this section, his remarks echoed Moscow's consistent line that Western governments bear responsibility for stalling efforts toward peace. The broader message of Lavrov's address was clear: Russia condemns terrorism, but it rejects blanket punishments that target an entire population. Instead, he argued, humanitarian relief, respect for international law, and a return to the negotiating table must guide the way forward. Moscow's emphasis on collective punishment reflects a growing criticism within international debates over Israel's response to the October 7th attacks. By highlighting the deaths of children and widespread hunger, Lavrov sought to frame Russia as a voice of moral urgency in the crisis. Jordan's involvement in the discussions further reinforced the regional significance of the issue. As custodian of Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem and a key player in Middle Eastern diplomacy, Jordan's alignment with Russia's concerns added weight to the joint appeal for immediate humanitarian action. The Gaza crisis, as described by Lavrov, is not just a matter of regional instability, but of global urgency. His repeated references to the United Nations underscored Moscow's call for international institutions to play a stronger role, particularly in ensuring aid reaches those who need it most. The minister's comments come at a time when diplomatic pathways appear increasingly fragile. Israel continues its military operations while Hamas remains entrenched in its positions. Civilians caught between the two face shortages of food, medicine, and safe shelter. By framing the conflict through a humanitarian lens, Russia is seeking to shape global perception, portraying itself as a defender of international norms, even as its own actions in Ukraine remain under scrutiny. This duality, condemning collective punishment in Gaza while facing accusations of aggression elsewhere, highlights the complexity of Russia's foreign policy messaging. Still, Lavrov's words struck a powerful chord. With his warning that children are dying of hunger, he placed the human toll at the center of the narrative, appealing to a global audience increasingly alarmed by images emerging from Gaza. The speech, while brief, carried weight. It combined a condemnation of terrorism with a rejection of blanket reprisals, called for immediate humanitarian relief, and demanded a return to negotiations. By doing so, Russia sought to project itself as both a responsible power and a moral actor in the Middle East. For Lavrov and his Jordanian counterparts, the message was urgent. The humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza requires not just statements of concern, but concrete action. And in his words, eliminating humanitarian problems, overcoming humanitarian disasters is the most urgent priority step.